I'm glad, Tony, that we get a chance to sit down together and do this series that we're looking at doing. And I'm for those of you who may not know, I'm Dr. Robert White. I teach here along with Dr. Tony Moyers.
Yes.
And we teach in the Religious Studies Department here at Athens State. Been doing that for a while.
Been doing it for a while, yeah. It's been really enjoyable.
It has been. It's been a great joy. And it's been fun to be able to teach together as well. Mm-hmm. And we're looking at doing this series, Everything is Interpreted,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
which I'm really looking forward to. I'm looking forward to diving in and talking about the implications of that. I think the subtitle of what we talked about is how to make sense of things.
Exactly. So,
and it includes the Bible, right?
It includes the Bible. Nothing's left out of that. It
right.
is a basic human activity that we're involved in every day. And so hopefully we can show you just a little bit about why that is the case, and then talk about how that might apply to understanding the Bible.
Exactly. I think that, when you say it on the surface, you go, well, everything is interpreted.
Mm-hmm.
Some pushback may occur, right?
Exactly.
Some, not just some people, but sometimes I guess all of us want to think that, well, now wait a minute.
But there are facts. There are things that are just given. We don't interpret those, but in fact we do.
Yes, and I'm going to show my age, but there was a show when we were younger. It used to come on, I think, with a police show. Just the facts, ma'am. Right? You remember that?
Yes.
So, well, that says something about both our ages.
But what do those facts mean?
Exactly. What does that mean? And where does meaning come from, right?
Exactly. Where is it located?
Yeah.
And that's very important when we'll talk about biblical interpretation.
It is. It is.
But yeah, I think it's important to just stop and think for a minute about how is it that everything is interpreted. Understanding the world is a human activity.
Right.
And there's the world out there that's apart from us, the physical world, the world that has trees and fish and
right.
grass and whatever, or bookcases and that sort of thing. That's the world that's apart from us as humans. But so we as human beings have to understand that world within some kind of context, or it's just there.
Right.
And but we don't do that. We tend to try to understand how things are related to one another. But what we don't sometimes think about is how much that is related to our culture, how much is related to the social world that we live in, how we've been socialized, and all of those things come into play, so that we may read the same words on the page, or we may see the same object in our world, but we don't understand them in the exact same way.
And that's true for those of that. If you've known someone a long time, you and I have been friends a long time. We've known each other since we were teenagers, maybe a little before. And yet, even so, we don't always see or interpret things the same way.
Exactly.
And that's true in a marriage or a family or with close friends. It's certainly true in the larger world, right? Mm-hmm. That we see it differently. Our frame of reference, was it Nietzsche that talked about perspectivism?
Mm-hmm.
The idea that we all have different perspectives.
And that's just it. I mean, we've been very, very close, but we probably have different interests.
Right.
And that's going to shape the way that we see things.
Yeah.
So that you read a text, you get one thing from it. I read a text and I will probably gravitate to something else.
Exactly. It would be like if I were to hand you my glasses and you gave me your glasses, we would be in trouble.
Would be blurry. The world would not look right.
So what I can see with my frames that are clear, that make sense to me,
right?
If you were to put them on, may not make sense to you.
Stumbling
it may
in the
not
walls.
be clear.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
And that's the challenge, right?
It is.
And I don't know, Tony, it seems to me that it's getting more difficult given the world we live in, and the way we communicate now, you through an email or a text, or we communicate in that way, and it's not always easy to understand someone's intent that way. Does that make
Yes. I mean, you get an email and the response to something you've written is, well, sure, or
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
that's fine. or
Fine.
something. So then I begin to wonder, well, how do you mean that?
Yeah.
Are you frustrated with me over something?
Right.
Is it just okay with you? Is it
Right.
something you're excited about? All those things are in play.
Right.
How do we determine which one it is? And there's so many other examples. The way that one dresses in a certain situation, and other people might see that dress as being authoritative. Some people,
Right.
giving you legitimacy. Other people may see it as being ostentatious.
Right. Right.
So there's different ways that different people are going to interpret the same thing. Someone,
Yes.
for example, may write in a letter to you something, and you are offended by something that's said, and you hand the letter to your friend and say, "What do you think about that?" And they might say, "Well, I don't see any problem with it. There's
Right.
nothing there." But you interpret it one way, and that kind of gets to not only the social and the cultural, but the psychological.
Right.
Not only were we raised differently and we have different cultural influences upon our lives,
Right.
but we're different people psychologically too.
So true. I mean, and we do it all the time. We do it even when we're not aware of it. We're interpreting, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're
Oh,
all,
and
we,
yeah,
we're
I
all,
think-
we're all doing that all the time. And you mentioned that example of just the word "fine," or one word, or one letter, as you said. If you give and we see it, we're reading the same letter,
Same words,
but
on
we
page.
don't interpret it the same way. So that this idea that interpretation is something I'm not interested in or I don't do. Well, you better think again, because truthfully, you're interpreting all the time.
Yes, and I think something you just said, it's not always conscious, and probably it's
Right.
subconscious more than it's conscious, because when you and I are conversing with one another and we're making these kind of judgments about what the other person is saying, a lot of that is happening below our level of consciousness.
Yeah, right.
So I may be offended by something, or I may really like something, not because of anything I'm really aware of,
right.
but there's something deeper there
that's going on.
causing that to happen.
And it frames it. I mean, it shapes, colors, tints, the way you receive it, the way you understand it.
Yes.
And we do it. We all do it all the time.
Yeah.
So, if you can't agree on just one word,
Or when you put several
when you
words
bring,
together.
and I've got a Bible, right? That was my grandfather's Bible, but I've got one sitting here for background, but also as a reminder that when it comes to something like a book, a collection, a library of books, and you come to that and go, well, what are the chances that we will ever agree on something like that?
Oh, I know. But there, so much of it, we just take the world for granted the way that it is and
We
so
do.
forth. But all of that, the expectations
Right.
that other people have for us, and we want to meet those expectations and so forth.
Yeah.
So all of that shapes our world. So
Right.
you can imagine if you meet someone reading the Bible who's never been exposed to it. I had a student one time in my class, and I was kind of amazed because she said that she had never read the Bible. She didn't grow up in a household
Right.
that
was
put
not.
any emphasis on the Bible whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I was amazed that her readings, when we talk about text, that they were so insightful. But they were things that I would have never thought about, because I was indoctrinated
Right.
into those things, and I've been learned them in Sunday school and so forth. So there's a context there
That right.
for how I understood it. And for her context was totally different. And she saw things that I would have never seen.
With fresh eyes.
With fresh eyes.
That's the key too. I think you bring up something really important that we often forget is that we can learn from each other.
Yes.
And we don't have to agree. Even when it comes to the Bible and interpreting the Bible, especially when it comes to the Bible and matters of faith, or just in an intellectual, academic way coming to the Bible, we don't have to agree on that. We have to be able to acknowledge that we're each bringing our own lens to read it. And then with maybe a little bit of humility, I think a lot of humility, to be able to learn from each other. Like you said, your student was teaching you at that point.
Exactly.
And I can't tell you how many times that's been true for me. So, and I think that's a wonderful thing.
And so when we talk, when we move into looking at how to interpret the Bible,
right?
That's a good thing. It's not that just every interpretation is fine, but some interpretations are more complete and better than others, and some are bad interpretations.
You're right.
So if interpretation is so important and colors everything we say and do, then we should be very careful about how we go about interpreting something as important
as
the Bible.
Well, you've written a text on this about reading responsibly.
Yes.
You're taking the text seriously, but more, and even beyond that, making sure that the way you're reading it and interpreting it, and maybe even applying it, is not something that's hurtful, harmful in the world, which we see happening.
Oh, yes.
Even today.
Yes.
I mean, we could bring up plenty of examples. So, but let's go back for a minute, because when it comes to the Bible, my work as a pastor across the years and teaching as well, I've occasionally encounters with people who tell me, this interpreting thing, I'm not interested in that. That's just something people make up.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to read it and believe what it says, and that's it. That's the bottom line. I'm just reading it,
and that's an interpretation because that's your context. You think that just reading it is important. Yeah. But it's much more than that. Exactly. So when you just read it and so forth, that's going to shape. You don't even, someone who says that probably doesn't even understand how the environment and so forth is shaping their understanding.
I think you're right. Let's for instance take one little simple thing out of the Bible of a commandment, an important phrase, but it's on the surface it seems very clear, right?
Everyone should be able to understand.
Yeah, exactly. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy.
Exactly.
Well, now that's easy, right? Just on the surface you go, well, I'm just going to, that's what I'm going to do. But if you dig deeper, Tony.
What that meant to me was I remember out playing on Sunday, and I was using a crosscut saw, and my father came out and saw that, and he said, he got all over me. He said, "You're not supposed to work on Sunday." I was playing. I wasn't working.
Right. But it was interpreted that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's exactly. We grew up together in a system that kind of would hold Sundays. You didn't mow your yard, didn't cut the grass. Cut the grass or clean the car. Those kinds of activities you just didn't do because it's Sunday. And that would. But here's the deal, and I had this conversation one time with someone who said that to me, that they just believe it, and that's the way it's going to be. And I said, well, the fact that you're choosing to worship on Sunday is an interpretation.
It is. And
the way to keep a day holy, well, there are how many thousands of ways in which people have interpreted that differently. So, just an example, but it's, I think, a good example of how interpreting is so important and so crucial to what we do, and that we all do it, whether we realize it or not.
We can be very legalistic about, okay, if you do more than this, that's work, and that's okay. We make our own kind of limitations and so forth on that, but we're making those. That's not in the text. It just says, keep the Sabbath day holy.
Right.
We're trying to understand, well, what does that mean? Does that
Right.
mean that I can go out to a restaurant? When I was young, we weren't even going out to eat on Sundays, and now that's just a very common thing for people to do.
Exactly.
We've now interpreted that to be
That's okay.
less binding than
Yeah,
it
that's-
was.
Hey, that's right. That whole idea, because that's where interpreting leads us, right? What's loosed, what's bound, what the way you read it, does it
Exactly,
allow
yeah.
it or restrict it? I agree. I think that's right, and so much has changed in that way.
So time is another
Yeah.
part of that process of interpretation. How I understood a text 20 years ago is very different than how I might understand it today. So everything is changing.
Right.
And the way that we understand text is changing.
That's right. That's an important point. And you mentioned earlier about culture, how important that is.
Yeah.
So when it comes to interpreting and interpreting the Bible, even there are academic methods, right, for interpreting that we use as tools that to help us. And of course, there are many of them. We'll get into them later in another video. But for today, how do we understand text that were written so long ago?
Yeah, I like the way you talk about it as tools. They're just tools that help us to kind of focus our attempts to understand the text. And there are many different ways. When I was in school, I think we were debating whether one way was better than another, and we were kind of, people came down on either side of that, and they're very adamant about that.
Right.
But I've come to see that there are many different perspectives and ways of reading text.
Right.
None of them are absolute in that that's the only way you can do it.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of ways and we could divide them into kind of historical ways where we're, we want to know when a text was written, why it was written, to whom it was written, because text, not only are we trying to understand a text, but we're trying to understand a text that occurred in a culture and an environment that is so different than ours today.
Right. So
how do we even begin to understand a text that was written thousands of years ago?
Right.
That's not easy. So
No.
that's one thing that we've got to do.
Yes.
So that's one way of approaching it. And scholars who look at it from a historical context think that once they've discovered what the author intended, that they've discovered the meaning of the text. There are literary approaches that read the Bible like we would read modern novels and so forth, and look for the themes and the plots and things.
Right.
And for them, the meaning is in the text itself. It's not in what the author intended.
Right.
They just read the text and interpret it that way. That's a little bit easier because they don't focus on the history of the text.
Right.
But still we have that, this was literature that was written long ago. So we still have to try to understand that text from where, our environment, our culture and setting.
Right. And understanding that literary, the difference in a poem or a declaration from a prophet or a parable, all of those are some wisdom, from the Psalms. Take one of the Psalms. The way knowing that helps you interpret.
You mentioned that. Even if we get a letter, there are various kinds of letters. So is it a business letter? Is it a personal letter? What kind of letter is it? And we have to know that before we know how to read that letter. And it's the same way with biblical text, knowing what is this a letter? Is it a narrative, a story?
Right.
Is it poetry?
Yes.
Those things matter in how we understand it.
You bet. I mean, it shapes the way you read it and interpret it.
But a third way is the cultural, and that's interesting too. I have some resistance sometimes, but there is what the text meant at a particular time in history. There's how people read the text and may understand it now, but there is also that kind of, how do I read it when I encounter that text
Right.
from my own specific context. So
Right.
the reader is also important in this process.
Oh, so you're so true. That's so important. And understanding that, seeing those things, that's the surface. That's the big picture.
Mhm.
But and we'll get into the weeds on some of this a little later in this series. But for today, I think just acknowledging that. So when you come to a text, you have to keep all of that in mind.
Yeah.
And especially a text like the Bible, you have to keep all of those things in mind. What was the historical time frame? What can we know about that?
Mhm.
What kind of what's the literary style? What is this?
Yeah.
How do I? Because there are ways of a parable is something you interpret differently
Yes.
than maybe another part of the Bible. And then the same is true with what you're saying about culturally, knowing what's happening culturally. Well, that even brings us to another challenge, and we don't have time to even get into this, but okay, so you've mentioned really important things about how do you kind of meet the text at the time, the history, style that it was written. But now think about how many years have passed
Oh no.
since the text emerged to begin with,
No.
and think about our lives and how that's been shaped, and how.
Well, sometimes with students, I just talk about letters.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for example, we interpreted many of Paul's letters in the church in a certain way, but
Right.
do we really go back and think about we're kind of reading someone else's mail.
Yeah.
They weren't written to us
That's
per
really
se.
that's a good way to say
They
it.
were written to particular
Yeah.
churches that had particular problems at a particular
Right.
time in history.
That's
And
right.
so our job then is say, well, what can that mean for us?
Right. That's good. That's I think so important. And so, we all of us, if nothing else in this series, we want to be able to really drive home the point that everything is interpreted.
Could I one other point, but there are some interpretations are different than others, and there's a lot of valid interpretations. But I think we also you mentioned responsibility.
Yeah.
We have to be responsible for our interpretations because there are interpretations that are harmful.
Yes.
They don't respect the text.
Right.
They're trying to put the text into some kind of preconceived idea of what the doctrines of the church or something like that, whatever. So we have to respect the text, the individual text, and what they say to us, and we have to be honest about them.
Yes.
I was having a discussion in the seminar we were teaching last night, and a student was doing a book review on violence in Scripture. I think we have to be honest
Yes.
about those things and recognize them,
Yeah, I agree.
and we have to be able to deal with those in a responsible way.
It's so true. And what you said, that's so important for all of us to recognize in reading and interpreting the Scripture, the Bible. And so, hey, in the weeks to come, we're gonna
It's gonna be fun.
We're gonna get into it. We're gonna get into
Yeah.
it. Maybe we'll do a few readings. We might invite a person or two into the conversation. We hope you'll stay with us and that you'll join us. Actually, you can reach either one of us here at Athens State. We through our email. It's tony.moyers@athens.edu, and you can find me at robert.white@athens.edu and reach out to us. Let us know.
Love to hear from you.
Yeah, if you have questions concerning interpreting, we'll try to maybe incorporate those into
that would be great.
into the discussion. But thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Tony, thank you for the conversation.
Enjoyed it very
Me
much.
too.
Yeah.